Hi, I'm Elena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my first Victober video. I thought it would be fun to talk about my favorite fictional Victorians. Most of the Victorian novels that I've been reading were written by the Brontës because I've been doing the Brontëlong with Sarah and Mary, so of course when talking about my favorite characters I have to mention the Brontës. But it turns out I think that the Brontës haven't really written many of my favorite characters. I just really like their stories and atmosphere overall. But I do have two characters that I just really enjoyed while reading. So first I want to discuss Wuthering Heights. And no, I'm not talking about Cathy and Heathcliff. While they are interesting, I don't think I could ever call them my favorite character. But who I want to talk about today is the narrator of this novel, who is Nell. And Nell is such an incredible narrator because she's the only one who has seen so many different perspectives of these two houses. Wuthering Heights is about two families who live near each other and who get tangled up in each other, and Nell works for both families at certain periods of time, and she is telling the story of everything that happened to a visitor who comes later to one of these houses. And I really liked her because first of all she's a working class woman, so her perspective of that is quite unique. It is interesting to see in how far her perspective on all the events is biased. She's the only person in a novel who could somehow tell the story in a way that it could be slightly true, because she is never really part of the events. She is always observing. Throughout the novel we do get to see a bit of her character because of course she is a servant, so she interacts a lot with the characters. She helps them make decisions, she helps them out of very bad situations at times, and her perspective, her voice is so fascinating. So even though I think she is a very underrated character when we talk about Wuthering Heights, she is absolutely essential for this novel. The character that I find interesting is Agnes from Agnes Grey. Now, I don't love Agnes as a person. I think she has a lot of flaws. Not necessarily flaws that were written with the intention of it being flaws. Agnes is a governess and we follow her throughout several years of her working as a governess. And Brontë based this on her own experiences, and it's very much of the time. So her flaws are also very much of the time in a way that she treats and views children. But because she is quite flawed and it's really like that coming of age kind of story, I found her quite interesting because she felt so real, so human. Her existence didn't feel like it needed to serve a purpose for the novel, which I think is often something you see in the type of character that Agnes is, so the governess who wants to do right. She is just a person, and that is something that I really appreciated in Agnes Grey. I want to talk about a character that not a lot of people like, but I find very fascinating, and that is Rosamund from Middlemarch. I've talked about Rosamund before and no one seems to agree with me, which is totally fine. This novel is set in Middlemarch. It's very chunky. We meet a lot of different characters. A lot of characters who are much easier to like than Rosamund, but in my opinion are maybe not as interesting. I would say I do want to give a bit of a shout out to Dorothea because her plotline is amazing, but not a plotline I connected as strongly with as Rosamund's plotline, because she is a bit of a Jane Austen's Emma. She is very spoiled and she feels like she deserves the absolute best in life, which serves her well at the beginning of the novel I think, but later on it starts to get very difficult to become a nice Victorian lady and live with that belief. And that is why I found her so fascinating, because she makes choices just for her own needs. She wants to meet her own needs, she wants to meet her own dreams, live on the standards that she finds important, and that is not what a good Victorian lady is supposed to do, especially if she is written about in a novel. And that egotism, that individualism, which we find very normal nowadays, was everything I think a woman of her time was not supposed to be. So that is, I think, a sneaky feminist way in which a very unlikable character can be very interesting and to our eyes I think modern in a way. So yes, that is why Rosamund is one of my favorite characters. Another George Eliot is Maggie from Mail on the Floss. This is also a coming of age story about, I think Maggie is a farmer's daughter. I remember this one not as well as I remember Middlemarch, but this is a much slower, simpler novel I think than Middlemarch, because we just follow the one family and the one main character. She develops different friendships as well that are just noteworthy in itself. But I want to talk about Maggie because she is obstinate. She is not really happy with being a girl and everything that entails, and throughout the novel that keeps on being a very interesting exploration. She is confronted with different forms of extreme sexism from people that she truly loves. She develops a very interesting relationship with a boy, which is very layered and complicated, and at the time that is needed she shows such action, such practical ability, which I feel like again is not really how a Victorian heroine is supposed to work. I think George Eliot is such a master within finding the balance of a character being a human being and a character serving a role in the book. And I found Maggie really fascinating. I loved reading about her. I wouldn't say that The Mail on the Floss is my favorite novel, like if I would rank Victorian literature, but Maggie Tulliver definitely is up there. Someone else who writes great characters is Elizabeth Gaskell. I cannot just pick one person from Cranford. I want to pick all of them because the spinsters and the old women in Cranford are just hilarious. They are great. They basically form all that is Cranford, and they gossip and they care about things that are not important at all to a modern eye, but it is their life and they own it, and they have the most ridiculous conversations. It was a joy to read about the ladies of Cranford, and I would highly recommend this book. Alright, before we get into the author who I think writes the most heartbreaking characters, I do want to mention A. Charles Dickens. The book itself was not something I massively enjoyed, but one of the main characters I did really like. I want to talk about Bleak House, and in particular about Lady Dedlock. In Bleak House we follow a family who is not really sure who is supposed to inherit something, and a lot of people are involved in that. And there are a lot of sub-storylines as well, because of course it's Dickens, it's overwhelming honestly. But one of my favorite storylines was that of Lady Dedlock, who has this big secret. So even though she is not written as cleverly as the George Eliot characters I discussed previously, she definitely falls into a lot of Victorian tropes. I found reading about her so engaging and so fascinating because she has this secret, and I did already know what it was because I had watched on TV about her character, so I kind of knew what it was, which I think helped because I could see all the ways that she was actively trying to hide it, and I could understand her behavior, which I do think Charles Dickens wrote really well. I just don't think the resolution of the whole story, parts of it I liked, parts of it were very cliche. But her as a character, I would watch like a whole TV series called Lady Dedlock because she is fascinating. And the last two books are Thomas Hardy characters. I think Thomas Hardy writes characters just to break its reader's heart. So first I have to mention Tess from Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Oh my, this book I loved because it is so heartbreaking. It will leave you in 1,000 pieces once you have finished it, but Tess is just such a resilient character. The way she is written, I have a hard time talking about Tess because she is just, ugh. Tess is a farmer's daughter, and when her father discovers a family member who is very wealthy, he sends Tess to that family member, and that is, I think, the fact that she is used in that way, that her beauty is used in that way, sets the tone for the entire story. Because Tess is just used, tossed around for everyone's pleasure. I really like that she's a working class woman, which had a very different look at what tragedy would look like for her. It is a tragedy in the way that we can, I think, easily understand now than some other tragedy in Victorian novels. Because she's a working class woman, she really tries to work herself out of her situation. She has different jobs, and that is something I really liked about Tess, because she never allows people to victimize her, even though they definitely absolutely do. She always rises above it, and that has its own problems in a way, but it's really interesting to see a woman like practically work herself out of certain situations in this time. The last character I want to mention is a character that I'm a little bit in love with, and that is Farmer Oak from Far from the Madding Crowd. In Far from the Madding Crowd we follow Bathsheba, and she inherits a farm that she starts to run, and she meets different men, has different romantic emotions, relationships, feelings. Farmer Oak is one of those men, and I know who I will pick. He is a sheep farmer. I wouldn't want to say he has an idyllic life, but the way that Thomas Hardy describes him, like taking naps in the meadow with his dog and his sheep, I could be part of that. And I just really like the way that he is described, in that he is such a pure practical man, that he has a lot of patience and a lot of love and respect for Bathsheba. I just enjoyed reading about him so much. Won't lie, the film helped as well with my falling in love with a fictional character. I wouldn't want to say that I have a favorite of all of these books. I know about myself is that I usually really like working class characters because they always feel a bit newer to me than characters I've read from before. This does give me some direction in what kind of Victorian novels to choose. If we have any of the same Victorian fictional people that we like in common, or did you love someone else? I think a lot of people will like different characters in Middlemarch. If you've read Middlemarch, let me know who your favorite character was, because I always like to talk about Middlemarch. It's one of my favorite books. I am also filming a Victober vlog because I am trying to fulfill the prompts for Victober. So if you would like to watch that, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel. For now, I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I'm wishing you the best of Victobers. Doei!